Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. Kwekakina. This virtual press conference is being held in Ottawa on Thursday, July 9th. I'm the moderator, Greg Quinn, with Market News International. With us today, we have Eleanor Olszewski, Minister of Emergency Management, Ginette Lavack, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services, and Corey Hogan, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. They are here to provide an update on the forecast for the wildfire season. Before guests deliver opening remarks, a safety announcement. I remind everyone dialed in to stick to best practices such as using the proper equipment and minimizing outside noise. This protects the safety of our translators. A similar message to the reporters in the room, who I believe are familiar with these guidelines. For those on the line, please use the raised hand function to ask a question. I believe that's all the housekeeping we have. And with that, ministers, please go ahead with opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I join you today from Edmonton, located in Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for First Nations and the homeland of the Métis. Thank you so much for joining us for the second update for the 2026 wildfire season. As of today, Canada's had 3,127 wildfires so far this year. There are currently 796 active wildfires, including 60 that are out of control. The total area burned so far this year is close to 1.2 million hectares. And while this season remains challenging, it really has not reached the scale seen in 2025. Last year, we saw fewer fires at this point in time, around 2,900, but a far more significant burned area with 4.6 million hectares burned. We know, though, that behind these statistics are people, families, communities, and local leaders, and we know they're facing difficult and uncertain circumstances. Evacuations have occurred in a number of communities, such as Lynn Lake and Marcel Coulomb First Nation in Manitoba, Fort Simpson and the town of Wrigley in the NWT, and communities impacted by the Brunswick Creek fire in British Columbia, among many others. We recognize the challenges and the disruptions that wildfires create for those who have to evacuate and leave their homes and their belongings. And our thoughts today are truly with everyone impacted. I also want to thank the firefighters, emergency management personnel, first responders, Indigenous fire crews, volunteers, local officials, and community leaders who work so hard every single day to protect people and keep their communities safe. Their work is difficult and it's dangerous, but it's deeply important. And we're reminded of this only a few weeks ago when 3 members of the NWT fire tragically lost their lives in a plane crash near Fort Simpson. My deepest condolences remain with their families and loved ones, their colleagues, and all of those mourning this tragic loss. Alors que la situation continue d'évoluer, notre gouvernement travaille en étroite collaboration avec les provinces, les territoires et les partenaires autochtones de tous les pieds afin de les soutenir. This season, that support has included our new fleet of federally funded aerial assets, or firefighting aircraft, managed by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, which we call CIFC. So far this summer, all 10 aircraft have been deployed multiple times across the country by CIFC, and they've been deployed depending on the most pressing operational need. Finally, I want to advise that we haven't received any requests for federal assistance or RFAs related to wildfires this summer. But there is currently an active RFA in Manitoba with respect to flooding in the Parkland region, and it was approved on July the 3rd. This response is being led by the province of Manitoba, and the federal government is supporting. by providing help through the Canadian Armed Forces, mobilizing humanitarian workforce partners such as Team Rubicon, and assisting the Provincial Operations Center in sourcing practical things, including things like pumps and recovery kits. And I really want to be clear, given the scale of the flooding in Manitoba, the federal government will be there financially to support the province through disaster financial assistance arrangements, which we call DFAA, and that's a program that will provide between 50 and 90% cost sharing for eligible provincial response and recovery expenses. So although today's update is focused on wildfires, the situation in Manitoba underscores what we all know already. Disasters are becoming more frequent and more severe and more costly. J'aimerais continuer d'encourager tout le monde à suivre les directives des responsables locaux. And we will continue working with provinces and territories, Indigenous communities, and other key partners to help Canadians stay safe, recover, and build greater resilience before, during, and after disasters. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, I think that means we're ready for questions. One question, one follow-up, please. Again, for people dialed in, please use the raise hand function to ask a question. We will begin in the room with Jillian Piper, Global.
Oh, apologies. I think we had two
here
more
you are.
sets of remarks.
Okay.
Madame Lavack and then myself.
Okay. We waited a polite 5 seconds, but please go ahead, sir.
Ginette, I believe you're first.
Merci beaucoup, Corey. Hello, bonjour. First, I would like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Asininu, the Inuwak, the Dakota Oyate, and Dene, as well as the national homeland of the Red River Métis, and home to many Inuit. I'm very happy to be here today, at least with my colleagues, joining them in making this really important update on the situation with respect to all of these events. Alors, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Comme vous l'avez entendu, la saison des feux de forêt s'intensifie rapidement partout au Canada. Wildfires are affecting First Nations in communities in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, as well as Ontario and Quebec. Several communities have been evacuated. Many others are closely monitoring conditions. Behind every evacuation and every emergency response are people. Families are forced to leave their homes. Elders are separated from loved ones. Children are living with uncertainty about what comes next. The emergency doesn't end when people leave their community. It continues in hotel rooms, in host communities, and in the daily uncertainty of not knowing when it'll be safe to return. I want to recognize the chiefs, the first responders, emergency coordinators, and community leaders. Thank you for protecting families and keeping people safe during these difficult moments. Your leadership makes a real difference. It saves lives and helps communities through some of their hardest days. I also want to echo Minister Olszewski's condolences to the families, friends, and colleagues of the wildfire aviation crew members who lost their lives in the line of duty. Partout au Canada, les changements climatiques rendent les feux de forêt, les inondations et les phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes plus fréquents et plus graves. Les Premières Nations sont touchées de façon disproportionnée. 4 communautés sur 5 sont situées dans des régions où le risque de feux de forêt est élevé. Since the start of the wildfire season, 45 fires have impacted 42 First Nations. To date, a total of 4,110 people from 17 First Nations have been evacuated, with 1,601 evacuees from 7 communities who remain displaced. As the wildfire season continues, we remain vigilant. We also stand ready to support First Nations across the country affected by floods and other severe weather events. I especially want to acknowledge the First Nations and communities affected by flooding in my home province here of Manitoba. As a Manitoban, I've seen how quickly these emergencies can change lives. I've also seen neighbors, community leaders, and First Nations come together with remarkable resilience and generosity. That spirit reminds us that no community should ever face these challenges alone. Our government will continue to support you every step of the way. Nous savons que les leaders des Premières Nations connaissent leur communauté mieux que quiconque. Ils sont les mieux placés pour diriger la préparation, les interventions et le rétablissement. Ahead of this wildfire season, Indigenous Services Canada worked closely with First Nations across the country. Together, we identified community needs early so support could be provided sooner, including advanced funding and the deployment of air purifiers. Emergency management is strongest when it's grounded in Indigenous knowledge, community leadership, broad partnerships, and local solutions. Indigenous Services Canada supports communities through the Emergency Management Assistance Program, or EMAP. Grâce au programme d'aide à la gestion des urgences, nous appuyons les Premières Nations avant, pendant et après les situations d'urgence. La préparation sauve les vies. C'est pourquoi la ministre Gormasti a annoncé cette année plus de 55 millions de dollars en nouveaux financements pour aider les Premières Nations à mieux se préparer aux situations d'urgence. Ces investissements soutiennent des initiatives comme IntelliFeu, le programme de préparation et d'atténuation non structurelle, ainsi que les renforcements des capacités communautaires. Ils permettent d'améliorer la planification, de renforcer les capacités locales et de soutenir la préparation tout au long de l'année. They also build on important investments already underway. Through the First Nations Fire Protection Strategy, we're supporting 110 fire protection projects. These include fire prevention initiatives, firefighter training and capacity building activities, and critical fire protection infrastructure. Since 2022, more than $23 million have also been invested through Wildland Urban Interface Program to support 147 projects. These investments strengthen local firefighting capacity through equipment, infrastructure, and specialized training for First Nations firefighters. Nous continuons également de financer 320 postes de coordonnateurs de mesures d'urgence dans les communautés, les conseils tribaux et les organisations des Premières Nations. Très souvent, ce sont les premières personnes vers qui les communautés se tournent. Elles aident à se préparer, à coordonner les évacuations et à planifier leur établissement. In Manitoba, our government invested $11 million before this wildfire season to help First Nations purchase firefighting equipment, vehicles, while supporting training, particularly in northern and remote communities. In Ontario, we invested through FireSmart to help the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario train 100 First Nations individuals through a firefighter development program focused on communities that are at greater risk. These are just two examples of community-led investments happening across the country. Every dollar invested before an emergency helps communities respond faster and recover stronger. En matière d'intervention et de rétablissement, nous remboursons 100% des coûts liés aux urgences dans les réserves. Cela comprend l'hébergement, le transport, la nourriture, les vêtements, les services de sécurité, le soutien en santé mentale et en mieux-être, ainsi que les services sociaux d'urgence. Notre responsabilité ne prend pas fin lorsque les évacuations se terminent. Le rétablissement prend du temps. Les communautés méritent un soutien qui respecte leurs besoins, leurs priorités et leur culture. Nous continuons de travailler avec les Premières Nations qui rebâtissent afin de financer des infrastructures et des logements qui sont plus résilients face aux feux de forêt, aux inondations et aux phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes. Emergency management. It's about helping communities prepare. It's also about protecting families when disaster strikes. And it's about standing with communities long after the headlines have faded. That is our commitment to First Nations. Because every family deserves to know that if they're forced to leave their home, they'll not face that journey alone. And every community deserves the support it needs, not only to recover, but to come back stronger and better prepared for the future. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Apologies to Ginette in the gallery. I was apparently supposed to go second, but I am pleased to join you on behalf of Natural Resources Canada for this important update. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you virtually from Calgary, the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta. Bien que dans de nombreuses régions du pays, les saisons de feux de forêt aient commencé relativement lentement, nous savons à quel point la situation peut changer rapidement alors que l'activité s'intensifie dans plusieurs régions du Canada. Dans ces moments-là, nos premiers intervenants et les personnels d'urgence sont prêts à répondre. Jour après jour, ils mettent leur vie en danger pour protéger nos familles, nos communautés et nos forêts. Nous leur en sommes profondément reconnaissants. Before going any further, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the lives lost this season. On behalf of our government, I offer our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of the volunteer firefighters from Nova Scotia who tragically lost his life in May while responding to a wildfire, as well as the families of the 3 individuals who died in the recent aircraft crash in the Northwest Territories. And these tragic events remind us that monitoring evolving wildfire conditions and forecasting future dangers is so important, so we can be better prepared and better protect Canadians. Going forward, Natural Resources Canada's latest modeling shows that elevated fire danger exists for July and August, and is expected to remain the highest across the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Northern Manitoba, and areas surrounding the Hudson Bay, as well as Northern Ontario and Quebec. In August, the southern interior of BC is also expected to experience higher than normal fire danger. To that end, in order to strengthen Canada's resilience, I'm pleased to announce a new federal investment of over $450,000 to the Des-Launay-Gautonnay to train 30 firefighters and $31,000 to the Chippewa Prairies First Nation to train up to 8 firefighters, helping to strengthen their community's local wildfire response capacity. À date, notre gouvernement a appuyé la formation de plus de 2,000%, soit le double de notre objectif initial de 1,000 participants, 2 ans en avant l'échéance prévue. Furthermore, today I am also announcing a federal investment of $750,000 across 4 projects led respectively by the Métis Nation British Columbia, the Métis Nation of Alberta, the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and the Métis Nation of Ontario. These investments will further strengthen wildfire preparedness and resilience at the local level by supporting risk mapping, emergency planning, evacuation coordination, and the integration of Indigenous knowledge into wildfire management. J'aimerais conclure en rendant hommage aux pompiers, aux premiers intervenants, aux gardiens de feu autochtones, aux gestionnaires de mesures d'urgence et aux bénévoles qui travaillent sans relâche pour assurer la sécurité de la population canadienne. Votre engagement, souvent dans des conditions extrêmement difficiles, incarne le véritable sens du service. Par votre courage, votre dévouement et votre générosité, vous faites honneur à notre pays et vous nous rappelez, même dans les moments les plus éprouvants, ce qui fait la force du Canada. And to all Canadians, as we continue to move through this wildfire season, our commitment to your safety remains constant, unwavering, uncompromising. When faced with wildfire, the Government of Canada promises to act with urgency, focus, and determination to protect you and your family, aid recovery, and strengthen efforts to prevent wildfire. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, ministers. Now we will turn to questions. I think I've run through the housekeeping, so we'll start with Jillian Piper Global. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for taking questions today. This is for Minister Olszewski and Corey Hogan. The Prime Minister has said Canada is going to exceed its emission targets. How concerned are you that your government increasing emissions will worsen climate change effects like wildfires?
Just with respect to that question, of course, a number of steps have also been taken by the federal government with respect to emissions reductions, and certainly with respect to the pipeline project in Alberta, there is a corresponding carbon capture project that will work together with that particular project. With respect to steps that the government's taken regarding climate adaptation and its relationship to emergency preparedness, we have taken many steps with respect to mitigation, steps with respect to infrastructure resilience. We're working on upgrading our public alerting system and our local response capacity as well. We know that Canadians are increasingly experiencing the impacts of climate-related disasters, and we're committed to helping communities. We understand and know this will require long-term collaboration between the federal government, provinces and territories, as well as municipalities. P.S. Hogan.
Yeah, look, climate change is the defining issue of our time. There's no question about that. It's important to underline, however, that we remain committed to net zero by 2050. And it's important to underline that while the MOU with Alberta and recent agreements build a pipeline to the West Coast, make us less reliant on the United States, which I think is a very good thing, they also include significant climate action, as Minister Olszewski was saying, including having an industrial price on carbon agreed to by Alberta, reducing emissions in the methane space by 75%, and as was mentioned, those investments in carbon capture. And this builds on other actions this government has taken to fight climate change, including creating credits for green investment, including targets for green building, including an electricity strategy that will have significant reductions in emissions, because we know that electrification of the economy is how we find the biggest emission reductions. So yes, it's certainly affecting forest fires. There's no question. It is hotter, it is drier, and those fires are becoming more intense as a consequence. And we remain committed to fighting climate change, a global problem that we need to work with the global community to combat.
Thank you. I hear you that your government is committed to a carbon capture project, but the Prime Minister has said that we are going to exceed the emissions limits. Do you have any concerns specifically about higher emissions and wildfires?
Well, it's a question about the short term, middle term, and long term, really, right? And we want to make sure that we have a practical path that is going to ensure that those emissions are reduced in the long term, because that is what we need. Now, I think we have to acknowledge that not even 2 years ago, we were looking at a world perhaps where there would be a Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre, and none of the climate action that I just described would exist right now. What's important if we want to combat climate change is that we do that in a durable, cooperative sense. And what we have right now is agreement with the government of Alberta to have an industrial price on carbon, to take that action on methane. That's durable climate action, and that's how you actually reach those goals. Because if you're going to live in a democracy and you're going to live in a country that fights climate change, you need to fight climate change in a way that works for the people in the democracy.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're on the line, use the raise hand function to indicate you'd like a question, but we have one more in the room. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC.
Thanks for taking our questions. My first one is either to the Minister or anyone else who wants to chime in. I'd like to ask you about what you think of Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources having to temporarily halt firefighting activities in northeastern Ontario over the weekend because of a drone. And I'd specifically like to know how you're reacting to this, how often this is happening, and essentially just how big of a problem this is becoming.
I can tell you that up to this point in time, I'm not aware of any firefighting activities anywhere in the country, either last season or this season so far, that have been impacted by drone usage. And I'm quite certain that that the province of Ontario will be taking active steps to deal with that. That would be obviously a serious concern, and as I say, something that no doubt the province will deal with all haste.
Thank you. And for my colleagues out east, we have a question about the forest fire forecast for Newfoundland and Labrador specifically, if you could share that with us.
Just based on what we heard this morning, it's my understanding that Labrador in particular, we're expecting to see some increased wildfire activity over the next couple of months. I do want to point out, though, that just with respect to the forecasting, we've seen an increase in wildfires basically across the country over the last couple of weeks. And as P.S. Hogan said during his remarks, we try to forecast as best as we can, but it's not an exact science by any means. And so, the situation may change over the next number of weeks and months, but based on just forecasting to date, it does look like Labrador in particular will be affected.
Thank you. Merci. We'll turn to the lines now. Francis Plur, Radio-Canada.
Vous m'entendez bien?
Oui. Oui, merci.
Parfait. Question en français, donc pour Radio-Canada, pour M. Hogan ou Mme Lavack. Vous y avez alludé en anglais. Comment on peut... en fait, le projet de LNG Canada va être agrandi. La Colombie-Britannique a eu plusieurs projets de LNG annoncés qui vont augmenter les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. On a annoncé la semaine dernière, un pipeline entre la Colombie-Britannique et l'Alberta. Comment on peut justifier des projets comme ceux-là alors que vous avez dit un petit peu plus tôt que les changements climatiques sont une réalité, qu'on va avoir des étés plus secs, plus chauds, avec des risques de feu plus importants?
En français, essentially my previous answer. Les changements climatiques sont l'enjeu déterminant de notre époque et c'est important, however, de les souligner en demeurer engagé à atteindre la carboneutralité d'ici 2050 et le protocole d'entente entre l'Alberta et le Canada prévoit notamment un pipeline qui nous rendrait moins dépendants des États-Unis. Il comprend aussi l'engagement d'Alberta à maintenir un prix industriel sur le carbone, à réduire les émissions de méthane et à investir dans le captage de carbone. Et c'est aussi on a aussi mis en place des crédits temporaires, des cibles pour des bâtiments plus propres et une stratégie électrique qui va permettre d'électrifier des larges pans de notre économie. Et on sait que c'est l'une des meilleures façons de rendre notre économie plus propre.
Un suivi pour Mme Lavack. Le Manitoba est relativement plus touché que d'habitude cette année par des feux. Comment ça se sent sur le terrain par rapport aux années précédentes, puisque c'est votre province de résidence? Qu'est-ce que les gens vous disent?
Ben c'est ça là. Donc à la limite, on est là pour appuyer, pour travailler auprès des Premières Nations et leurs communautés afin de leur donner les supports nécessaires pour passer à travers de ces défis-là. Lorsqu'ils vivent en situation de déplacement, on est toujours là pour les appuyer également. Donc, je crois que tout le monde se prépare pour le pire, puis traite de les situations au fur et à mesure qu'ils évoluent. Donc, nous autres, on va juste continuer. Comme j'ai dit, on a déjà avancé des fonds avec Services aux Autochtones dans ces communautés-là afin de s'assurer qu'ils ont les ressources nécessaires sur le terrain. Alors, on demeure prête à supporter puis travailler avec eux pour résoudre.
Merci. Thank you. On the lines again, Carol Sanders, Winnipeg Free Press.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. Just, sorry to be Manitoba-centric here, but just going back to what Corey Hogan was saying about funding to Métis and provinces, new funding. I didn't hear anything about the Red River Métis. Is there any funding specifically for new training or mitigation for the Red River Métis? Because a lot of those communities are in what looks like to be the fire zone for the coming weeks.
Yeah, they're drafts.
So the funding announced today is additive to other funding we've provided for training. Carol, I can get back to you on the Red River Métis specifically.
Okay.
Or I can get the department too.
Okay, and just a question for Ms. Lavack about services for communities. I mean, people have been through a lot here with flooding and fires over the last few years. Can you talk about how prepared that First Nations in Northern Manitoba are for what's ahead? I mean, specifically, have you talked to anybody with MKO or the chiefs just about how prepared they are and if you're confident that they're ready to handle what's ahead?
All right. Check my inbox.
Thank you for the question, Carol. Yeah, I mean, Indigenous services, the personnel, the staff are absolutely in contact directly with those communities and working through and trying to sort of anticipate a little bit what is to come. And so that's part of the reason why we've anticipated and flowed funding so that they can get that preparedness. It's also about training. It's also about, having Indigenous people in their communities and elsewhere better prepared themselves to be dealing with these situations so that we can can avoid even evacuations when possible. And so, as I've mentioned, over 55 million has been invested in all of that emergency management side of things. So I think that the communities are better prepared. We saw it initially with Peguis First Nation. There was a lot of preparedness happening right ahead in advance of that emergency. And so I think that we're getting there. It's a work in progress. There's always more to do, but I'm feeling pretty confident that people are in a better situation this time around, always knowing that we have got to do more and stay very, very vigilant around this issue.
Thank you. I'll take the moderator's prerogative and ask a question here. I was wondering what you're hearing from, say, forestry companies or oil and gas companies that may be affected by these fires. Like if they're telling you anything about how it affects their operations, or if you share information with them or advice on how to manage the wildfires.
I'll just start, but I suspect P.S. Hogan might have a little bit more information than I do. But certainly from my perspective, my understanding is that forestry companies, oil and gas companies, they are very focused on safety, and they take very careful, very thoughtful, and very thorough safety measures with respect to all aspects of their operations, including the likelihood of wildfires or any other kinds of natural disasters. And, what I do know is that they do exercises often with local municipalities and provinces as well. And so just generally, those are my comments with respect to, the readiness and any information received from forestry and oil and gas companies. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically to specific conversations that have occurred, but I can tell you that forest fires represent a big economic risk. It's a risk to communities, it's a risk to lives. That's obviously our primary concern. But when you talk about oil and gas infrastructure, of course, when you talk about electricity infrastructure, of course, when you talk about basically anything that exists outside of a major urban center, where it's right there at the barrier between wilderness and so the cities, you're going to have some of those concerns, and it's something that's a part of all of their planning. And when these things happen, they often exercise an abundance of caution and try to move resources out of the area where possible. Of course, when you're talking about the forestry sector as well, it's also damaging their product. This is something that they then in turn are going to be logging and selling. But if it burns down, that simply can't happen, to state the obvious. So it's a significant economic impact. I think it underlines exactly what we were saying earlier about the growing challenges of climate change. Climate change is going to create economic risk, and it's why it's so important that we find durable ways to fight climate change, and it's why it's so important that we work together to do so.
I would just add a comment to that, and that is that the Government Operations Center in our department, we are always monitoring critical infrastructure where we know there's potential for damage, so that we can work together with provinces and territories and those companies. So I just did want to add that quick point. Thank you.
I believe this is the last question, but maybe a public service here. There's some messages that officials provided about what Canadians are supposed to do with their houses and their properties to kind of protect themselves against it. I mean, wonder if you could share some thoughts, or also do you think that kind of message is getting through? Because some it may be, there may be some homeowners who don't take the message seriously. They think, wildfire is just a global catastrophe. There's not that much they can do as an individual to protect themselves.
I'll start just by saying that, from our perspective, public safety is very concerned with making sure that Canadians understand the risk, both in terms of wildfire and in terms of flooding as well as some other natural disasters. And so there is very good information contained on the public safety website. There is Get Prepared. You can go to getprepared.com, and there's a lot of information there with respect to how homeowners can deal with the possibility of wildfires or floods in their regions. We also launched a national flood portal system approximately 2 months ago. So that was a federal government, a public safety initiative. And as soon as we have agreements reached with the provinces and territories, a homeowner will be able to log on to that portal, simply put in their address, and that portal will identify the kind of flooding risk that homeowner could be exposed to. There's also an ability to see what the entire community could be exposed to. And it's a blunt tool in the sense that it's just rated in 4 different degrees of severity. But in addition, the homeowner can obtain information with respect to practical and sometimes very inexpensive steps to take that can avoid loss and damage in terms of flooding. So those are just a few of the programs and places where information is available to Canadians. I agree with your point, though, the overall point being that we know that there are a number of Canadians that don't adequately understand the risk. And I know that my department we're making every effort to ensure that Canadians do. There's also another program that was mentioned this morning, FireSmart, and a number of other websites that maybe PS Hogan and PS Lavack can address as well. But there are numerous sources of information for the Canadian public, and I really am encouraging Canadians to please go to those sites, check and see what they can do. And then during times, just before and during crisis situations as well, to make sure that you're obeying and following, what local authorities have to say, whether it's about air quality, the need for evacuation, etc. Just fundamentally important. And I'm so glad that you made that point. Thank you.
I'll just add, fire risk is real and fire risk is growing, and prevention is much better than response. So it's really important that Canadians, especially Canadians who live on the boundaries of wildfire areas, take the proper precautions. They want to make sure there's not too much fuel around their house. They want to make sure they have an escape plan. They want to make sure they are prepared to leave if they need to leave. And they need to be really live to the fact that wildfires can come rapidly. So it is something that I hope all Canadians will take seriously. And I know that is the best prevention against loss of life or loss of property.
Okay, I believe that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Merci. Bonne journée.